Whoever runs this building should have to live in it for a week, I said, not really to anyone. No heat on the third floor since Tuesday. Elevator's been temporarily out of service since Christmas. I have a client walking through that lobby in 9 hours. The woman with the mop didn't look up. She kept working the bucket back and forth across a floor that was already clean, the wheels squeaking on every third pass. 9 hours, she said. That's specific. It's a specific problem. She wrung the mop out, unhurried, like she had nowhere else she needed to be at 11 at night. What's the client walking through for? I hadn't expected a follow-up question. Most people, when I vented, gave me a sympathetic nod and went back to whatever they were doing. She'd stopped moving entirely. Renewal meeting. If they walk in and it's 58 degrees and the elevator's got a handwritten sign on it, that's not a great look for a company that pays $4,000 a month to be here. $4,000. She said it like she was checking her math against something. That include the parking level? I don't know what it includes. I do marketing, not the lease. Somebody should know what it includes. I laughed, more out of surprise than humor. You want to file that complaint with management, be my guest. I've tried 3 times this month. Have you? Not a question, really. She went back to the mop, and for a second I thought that was it, conversation over, and I felt strangely disappointed about that. I'm Daniel, I said, because it felt rude not to, after she'd actually listened. Reyes. 3rd floor. She didn't offer anything back. Just a small nod, like she was filing the name somewhere. Then she picked up the bucket and walked it toward a door at the far end of the lobby, not the one marked staff only that the other cleaning crew used, but an unmarked one beside the elevators I'd never seen anyone go through. I stood there a second longer than I needed to, watching a door close on a woman whose name I still didn't have. The next morning the 3rd floor was still cold. I sent the complaint again, CC'd my manager this time, and got back an automated message thanking me for my feedback. I told myself I wasn't thinking about her. I was thinking about the meeting. But when I passed the lobby around 6 that evening and it was empty, I noticed I'd slowed down to look. If you've ever said something you'd never say to someone's face, straight to their face, without knowing it, stick around. I promise you it gets worse before it gets good. I caught myself checking the lobby on my way out Tuesday and again Wednesday, telling myself both times it was about the elevator sign, whether anyone had bothered to update it. Both times the lobby was empty except for the security guard at the front desk, a guy named Marcus who I'd started bringing coffee for on cold mornings, mostly because nobody else seemed to. You looking for someone? Marcus asked Wednesday, not looking up from his crossword. The elevator sign. Wanted to see if it changed. Uh-huh. He didn't push it, but he also didn't buy it, and I didn't correct him. I didn't see her again until Thursday, and by then I had a new complaint and no more patience. Same door? I asked, half joking, when I found her again near the elevator bank, this time restocking a supply closet rather than mopping. Same door. She glanced at me. You look like you have something to say. The heat's fixed. The elevator isn't. And now there's a leak on 2 that management is calling cosmetic. Cosmetic, she repeated, and something crossed her face that wasn't quite a smile. Did they use that word in writing? Word for word. Keep it, she said. Everything. Emails, timestamps, who you talked to. Every complaint, every non-answer. Keep a record of all of it. It was oddly specific advice for someone whose job, as far as I knew, was mopping floors and restocking paper towels. I almost asked her why it mattered to her. Instead I said, you planning to use that against them? Maybe, she said, and there was nothing playful in how she said it. I didn't push. I had a meeting to get to, and she had a supply closet to finish, and neither of us seemed inclined to explain ourselves further. But I found myself, walking away, replaying the way she'd said keep it, not like advice. Like instruction. I still didn't know her name. I noticed, for the first time, that I wanted to. By the second week I'd stopped pretending the complaints were going anywhere. Ross Whitfield, who ran the management office 2 floors down, had a way of making every issue sound like it was somehow my fault for noticing it. "You're the one who emailed about the elevator again," he said, not looking up from his desk when I stopped in. "Third time. It's a maintenance queue, Mr. Reyes. Everyone's in line." "There isn't a line. There's a sign that's been taped to the door since December." He finally looked at me, and it wasn't unkind exactly, just tired in a way that told me he'd had this conversation with other tenants before and won it every time. "I'll flag it as a priority." He didn't write anything down. I found out later, from someone in HR who I wasn't even close with, that Whitfield had mentioned me by name in an internal note. Called me difficult. Said I was escalating unnecessarily. I read the message twice, sitting in my car in the garage, before I put my phone face down on the passenger seat. I sat there longer than I meant to. It wasn't the word difficult that bothered me. I'd been called worse by people whose opinions mattered less. It was the ease of it, the way one line in an internal email could reframe a legitimate complaint as a personality problem, and how many times that trick probably worked on people who didn't have the energy left to argue with it. I thought about my father again. How many versions of difficult or not a team player had probably shown up in files he never got to read. I went looking for her that night. Told myself it was coincidence when I found her near the elevator bank again, taping a fresh out-of-service sign over the old one, her expression unreadable. "They're calling me difficult," I said. "For asking someone to fix a broken elevator. Are you difficult?" "I don't think so. I think I'm the only one asking." She considered that, the tape dispenser still in her hand. That's usually how it starts. Someone asks a normal question, and the people who don't want it answered decide the problem is the question. "You sound like you've seen this before." "I've seen a few things." She smoothed the corner of the new sign down with her thumb, careful, like it mattered that it be straight even though no one else would notice. "Whitfield's been running this building's day-to-day for a long time. Longer than he should have, maybe. You know him? Everyone who works nights here knows him." She said it lightly, but something about the timing made me wonder if I'd asked the wrong question and gotten a careful non-answer instead. I didn't have a good reason to stay longer than the conversation required. I stayed anyway, leaning against the wall near the mailroom while she finished the closet inventory, talking about nothing, a bad commute, a client who'd ghosted my whole team, the particular indignity of a building that couldn't keep its own elevator running. "You come find me a lot for someone who just wants his complaints filed," she said eventually, not looking at me, focused on a clipboard. "Would you rather I didn't?" She didn't answer that directly. "I'd rather you kept your receipts," she said instead. "Emails. Dates. Everything Whitfield tells you and doesn't put in writing. You keep saying that like you're building a case. Maybe I'm just careful. Careful people don't usually memorize a stranger's rent." "I didn't memorize it. You told me." She said it evenly, but there was the faintest pull at the corner of her mouth, like she knew exactly how thin that answer was and was daring me to call it out again. I laughed, because it was easier than pointing out how little that answer actually explained. But walking back to my car, I thought about how she'd known Whitfield's name without me saying it, how she talked about the building like she had more stake in it than a paycheck should require, how she'd said someone who just wants his complaints filed like she already understood exactly what I wanted before I'd said it out loud. I didn't have an explanation. I had a growing list of things about her that didn't add up, and, underneath that, a smaller and more inconvenient fact: I'd started looking for her before I had a complaint to bring. The building was nearly empty by the time I found her on the 9th floor, sitting on an overturned bucket near the supply room with a thermos, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead in the particular way they only do after 10 at night. "Long shift," I said. "They're all long." I sat on the edge of a nearby windowsill, not really planning to stay, and then stayed anyway. We talked about small things first, the impossible cold of the stairwell, a leak on 4 that had finally, mercifully, been fixed. She asked, at some point, without any particular build-up, why I worked so late so often. Trying to prove something, probably, I said, more honestly than I meant to. My dad worked at the same company for 26 years. Showed up early, never complained, never asked for more than what he was owed. They let him go 8 months before his pension vested. Called it restructuring. She didn't offer sympathy, the practiced kind people give when they don't know what else to say. She asked, did he fight it? No. He just accepted it. Said that's how it goes. I turned the thermos cap over in my hands, not sure why I was still talking. I think some part of me is scared that's how it goes for me too. That I'll spend years being reasonable and it won't matter. It matters, she said, quiet enough that I almost missed it. Whether they notice or not. It matters. There was something in how she said it, not comfort, exactly, but recognition, like she was speaking from somewhere specific rather than generally. I asked her name again, gently this time, not as a formality. She opened her mouth like she might finally say it. It's. A door slammed somewhere below us, the sound carrying up the stairwell, and whatever she'd been about to say stopped in her throat. She stood up fast, brushing off her knees. I should finish the floor, she said, and it wasn't really about the floor. You were about to tell me something. I was about to make a mistake. She said it like a joke, but her eyes weren't joking. Good night, Daniel. She used my name. It was the first time. I noticed that more than I noticed her walking away. I sat on that windowsill a while longer, replaying the moment she'd almost said it, whatever it was, and stopped herself. I told myself it was probably nothing. A name she didn't like, an old boyfriend, something ordinary. But the way she'd caught herself wasn't ordinary. It was the look of someone who'd almost handed over something they'd decided, a long time ago, not to hand over anymore. I didn't get her name that night. I got something else instead, the certainty that there was a reason for the silence, and that whatever it was, it mattered to her more than it should for a woman who mopped floors for a living. I thought about asking Marcus at the front desk if he knew her name, and then didn't, for reasons I couldn't fully explain to myself. It felt like it would be cheating somehow, getting the answer secondhand instead of the way she'd actually decided to give it. I told myself I could wait. I didn't examine too closely why waiting for her, specifically, had started to feel worth doing. Chapter 4. I was in the admin office on the second floor picking up a signed vendor form for my team when I saw the memo sitting open on the front desk, face up, the kind of document nobody thinks to hide because nobody thinks anyone's looking. Q3 Maintenance Budget Review, approved by E. Castillo, owner. I read it twice. Then I read the small print under the letterhead, Castillo Properties Group, and did the thing you do when a piece of information doesn't fit anywhere in your head. I read it a third time, slower, like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. E. Castillo. I thought about her hands wringing out a mop. I thought about keep your receipts, said like an instruction instead of advice. I thought about everyone who works nights here knows him, and how she hadn't actually answered whether she was one of them. I didn't say anything to the woman at the front desk. I took my form and walked out, and I don't remember most of the walk back to my office, just the sound of my own footsteps sounding louder than they should have. I went over every conversation we'd had, one at a time, like evidence. The way she'd known Whitfield buried complaints before I told her. The way she'd said 4,000, that include the parking level like she was checking numbers against a ledger she already had memorized. The unmarked door. The advice to document everything, from someone who had no reason to care whether Whitfield got caught, unless she was the one who'd eventually have to fire him. She wasn't a cleaner keeping her head down. She was the owner of the building, mopping her own lobby at 11 at night, listening to me complain about her own management company like I was reporting a stranger's negligence. I went back to the front desk once, an hour later, with a flimsy excuse about a delivery, just to see if the memo was still there. It wasn't. Someone had filed it, or she had, and the absence of it somehow felt like more proof than the memo itself had been, like the building had already closed back around the secret, the way water closes over a stone. I didn't confront her. I told myself it was because I didn't have proof beyond a memo I'd seen upside down on someone else's desk. That wasn't the real reason. The real reason was that I didn't know yet what I'd say, and some part of me, the part that had told her things about my father I hadn't told anyone in years, wasn't ready to find out that all of it had been said to my landlord. I saw her that evening near the elevators, and I said less than usual. She noticed. She always noticed things like that. "You're quiet tonight. Long day." She studied me a second longer than the answer required. "That's not it." "It's fine," I said, which was the kind of thing you say when it very specifically isn't. She didn't push, which somehow made it worse. I stood there wanting to ask her outright and not asking, wanting her to just say it and knowing she wouldn't, not unless something forced the question into the open. I told myself I'd bring it up the next time I saw her, calmly, like an adult, once I'd figured out what I actually wanted to say. I ran the conversation in my head a dozen different ways that night, none of them landing right, too angry, too forgiving, too much like I was auditioning for her approval instead of asking a fair question. I didn't get the chance to choose the moment. Someone else chose it for me. Whitfield found me by the mailroom 2 days later, a folder under his arm, wearing the kind of smile that people wear right before they say something they've been saving. "You've been spending a lot of time with the night cleaning staff," he said. "I talk to people. It's not a crime." "No," he agreed. "Although I'd think twice about what you've been telling her." He let that sit a second. "You do know she's the owner, right? Elena Castillo. Watching all of you. Probably wrote down everything you said about me." I didn't answer fast enough, and he read it correctly. I hadn't known, not for certain, not until he'd just said her full name out loud like it was nothing. "Careful," he said, not unkindly, which somehow made it land worse. "People like that don't stay curious out of kindness." He walked off before I could ask him how he knew, and it occurred to me only later, replaying it, that a property manager wouldn't ordinarily know or care which tenant had been talking to the overnight cleaning staff, unless he'd been watching for exactly this, waiting for a reason to turn her curiosity into a threat he could use. I found her 20 minutes later on the 9th floor, and I didn't bother easing into it. "Elena Castillo," I said. "You own the building." She didn't deny it. That, more than anything, told me it was true. "Yes. You let me stand here and complain about your own company for 2 weeks. I let you tell me the truth," she said. "Which is more than I get from anyone who knows who I am. That's not the same thing as honesty. I didn't lie to you. You let me believe something that wasn't true. That's the same thing." My voice was louder than I meant it to be, and I heard it bounce off the stairwell walls. Was I a test? Something to see whether the tenants would say the same things to your face that they'd write in an anonymous complaint? "It started that way," she said, and I respected, even furious, that she didn't try to soften it. "It didn't stay that way. How am I supposed to know which part is which?" She didn't have an answer for that. I watched her decide not to have one, watched her jaw set, her shoulders square, the same posture I imagined she used in rooms full of people who wanted something from her. "I have somewhere to be," she said, which wasn't true, or if it was a place she'd invented in the last 10 seconds to have a reason to leave. She walked away before I could say anything else, and I let her, because I didn't trust what would come out of my mouth if I followed her. I stood in that stairwell a long time, replaying 2 weeks of conversations that I'd thought were about a broken elevator and a leaking pipe, and understanding, slowly, that they might have been about something else the entire time, on her end if not on mine. I didn't know anymore what I'd actually lost. Just that it felt like something. I went home and did the thing I never do, which is sit in a dark apartment without turning on the television or opening my laptop, just sit, running the last 2 weeks back through my head like I was looking for the exact sentence where I should have known. There wasn't one. That was the part that bothered me most. She hadn't slipped. She'd been careful the entire time, careful in a way that meant every unanswered question I'd let go had been a choice on her part, not an accident. I went back 3 nights later, not because I'd cooled off, but because leaving it there felt like agreeing that the whole thing had been fake, and some part of me, the honest part, underneath the anger, didn't believe that. I found her in the same supply closet on 9, going through inventory that didn't need going through. "I'm not here to yell," I said. "I know." She didn't stop what she was doing. "I've been waiting for you to come back and yell anyway." I thought about it. That got a small, tired almost smile out of her, the first one I'd seen since the memo. She set down the clipboard. "I was engaged, 4 years ago," she said, without me asking. "To a man who told everyone, including me, that he didn't care about the company or the money. He proposed on the roof of this building. My father liked him." She said the last part like it still cost her something. "When the company had a bad year, a real bad year, the kind where I wasn't sure we'd keep the building, he left. Not slowly. In about 6 weeks. He told a mutual friend it wasn't sustainable for him anymore. That doesn't excuse lying to me. I'm not saying it does." She looked at me directly, which she hadn't done in the stairwell. "I'm saying I don't know how to let anyone see me without checking first whether it's me they want, or what I have. I stopped trusting my own read on people. So I started doing this instead. Nights, no name, no title. If someone's decent to a woman with a mop, it's not because of what she can do for them. And was I decent? You were the first person in a long time who complained to me like I mattered, instead of thanking me like I didn't." I sat down on the same overturned bucket she usually used, because standing suddenly felt like the wrong posture for the conversation. "I'm still angry," I said. "You should be. But I understand it. That's not the same as forgiving it." "No," I agreed. "It's not." We sat there a while without talking, which would have felt unbearable 2 weeks earlier and now just felt like two people who'd run out of things to perform for each other. I thought about my father again, the way he'd swallowed 26 years of being underestimated without ever once demanding to be seen clearly. I understood, sitting there, that her hiding and his silence weren't so different, both of them protecting themselves from a version of being known that had already hurt them once. I didn't tell her I forgave her. I told her I'd think about it, which was true, and she nodded like that was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in months. Before I left, she said one more thing, almost as an afterthought, though I don't think anything she said was really an afterthought. "For what it's worth, the version of me you met the first night wasn't a performance. The mop was real. The hours were real. I just left out the part where I could have made all of it stop with one phone call and chose not to." "Why didn't you?" "Because the calls I could make don't tell me anything true." "You did." She picked the clipboard back up, like the conversation had reached the edge of what she could say without it turning into something else entirely. "I'm not asking you to be fine with any of this tonight." "Good," I said. "Because I'm not." But I meant it without the heat it would have carried 3 nights earlier, and I think we both heard the difference. Neither of us knew yet that Whitfield wasn't finished. The email came from my own company's legal department, forwarded by my manager with a subject line that made my stomach drop before I'd even opened it: "Tenant complaint filed against company, lease review pending." Whitfield had submitted a formal complaint alleging my firm had violated 3 separate clauses of the lease: noise, unauthorized after-hours access, damage to common areas. All of it fabricated. All of it timestamped to nights I'd been in the building talking to Elena. My manager called me into his office within the hour. "If this goes to the ownership group as written, we lose the renewal. You understand that? It's not true. Any of it. Doesn't matter if it's true. It matters what's in writing when the lease committee reviews it. He looked at me for a long moment. Distance yourself from it. Don't comment, don't get involved, let legal handle the response. If your name's all over this when it gets sorted, it reflects badly on you regardless of the outcome. It was good advice. Safe advice. The kind of advice that would have let me walk away with my job intact and my name clean. I sat with it over lunch, alone, turning it over the way you turn over a decision you already know the shape of but haven't admitted yet. Part of it was Elena, I wasn't going to pretend it wasn't. But most of it, if I'm honest, was smaller and more selfish than that. I was tired of being the guy who kept his head down and hoped fairness would eventually notice him on its own. I'd watched that strategy fail my father for 26 years. I didn't want to find out, at 30, that I'd inherited it. I thought about my father, sitting in a similar office 20 years earlier, being told some version of don't make this harder than it needs to be, and doing exactly that, going quiet, going along, protecting nothing but the appearance of being easy to keep around. I called Elena's office that afternoon, not to warn her I was doing something, but because by the time I picked up the phone I'd already decided, and it felt like something I owed her to say out loud rather than let her discover secondhand. I'm going to give a statement, I said. The real one. Dates, times, what I was actually there for. It'll show Whitfield fabricated the complaint, but it also puts my company square in the middle of the thing my manager told me to stay out of. That could cost you your job. I know. Why would you do that? Because I spent 2 weeks being the only person who said the true thing out loud, and I'm not going to stop now because it's finally expensive. I didn't wait for her to respond to that. You didn't ask me to do this. I want that on the record too. I gave the statement the next morning, every date, every visit, the actual reason I'd been in the building after hours, none of it flattering to me exactly, a man who'd spent 2 weeks venting to a cleaner instead of going through channels, but all of it true. Whitfield's fabricated timeline fell apart within a day once it was compared against building access logs Elena's office produced without needing to be asked twice. My manager wasn't happy. Nobody fired me, but nobody thanked me either, and the silence in the office for the next week told me everything about where I stood. A couple of co-workers asked, carefully, whether I was worried. I told them the truth, which was that I was, and that I'd decided it was worth it anyway, and most of them looked at me like that wasn't really an answer. Maybe it wasn't. It was the only one I had. I didn't hear from Elena for 3 days. When I finally saw her, it wasn't in the lobby, and it wasn't at night. She was standing outside my office door at 4 in the afternoon, in daylight, no mop, no supply closet, wearing exactly what someone wears when they've stopped hiding. You're not supposed to be up here in the middle of the day, I said, because it was easier than saying anything real first. I own the building, she said. I can be anywhere in it I want. That got the first real laugh out of me in a week. She didn't laugh with me, not quite, but something in her face loosened. Whitfield's gone, she said. As of this morning. I should have removed him 2 years ago. I kept telling myself it would look disloyal to my father's memory. It took watching what he did to you to actually do it. I didn't do it for that. I know. That's why it mattered. She looked past me into my office, then back. I heard what you told your manager. That you didn't do it because I asked you to. I meant it. I believe you. She said it simply, without the guardedness that had been in almost everything else she'd said to me. I've spent 4 years assuming people would eventually tell me what I wanted to hear if it benefited them enough. You didn't. Even when it would have been easier not to say anything at all. We stood there a moment, the office around us going on with its ordinary afternoon noise, phones ringing somewhere down the hall. My name, she said, is Elena. I know that now. I mean, I'm telling you. Not you finding it on a memo. She held out her hand, an oddly formal gesture that somehow fit exactly what the moment needed. Elena Castillo. I took it. Daniel Reyes. I know, she said. You told me the first night. I just never told you mine back. You're telling me now. I'm telling you now. It wasn't a declaration. Neither of us said anything about love, not that day, standing in a hallway with phones ringing and a lease renewal still pending somewhere upstairs. What she offered instead was smaller and, I've come to think, more honest. Her name, freely given, the thing she'd withheld the first night we met, handed back now without anyone forcing the question. There's a dinner, she said. Nothing to do with the building. I'd like you to come, as yourself, and I'll come as myself. No mop. No memo. Just see how it goes when neither of us is testing the other. I'd like that. There's one more thing, she said, and for a second the old guardedness came back into her voice, like this part cost her more than the rest. The lease committee approved your company's renewal this morning. Not because of anything between us. Because Whitfield's fabricated complaint fell apart and the actual maintenance records finally spoke for themselves. I wanted you to hear that from me, not from a memo. I appreciate you saying it that way. I'm trying, she said, to say things the plain way from now on. It's going to take practice. She left the way she always did, unhurried, but this time she didn't head for an unmarked door. She walked out through the same entrance everyone else used, past the front desk, past the lobby where a mop bucket no longer sat in the corner because the overnight crew, the real one, had been fully staffed for the first time in months. I stood at my window and watched her cross the street below, and I thought about the first night, the way she'd taken my name and given nothing back, walking off toward a door that made no sense at the time. It made sense now. It had taken her 4 years, and me 2 weeks of complaining to the wrong person, to get here, to a building with a working elevator, a manager who told the truth for a living, and 2 people who'd finally stopped performing for each other long enough to actually be seen. The dinner happened 2 weeks later, and it was ordinary in the best way, a small place a few blocks from the building, no reservations under a company name, no one recognizing her. She laughed twice at things I said, actually laughed, not the careful almost smile from the supply closet. I told her about my father again, the full version this time, including the part where I'd resented him for years for not fighting harder, before I understood that he'd simply run out of ways to be believed. You fought, she said. For both of you, maybe. I don't know about that. I do, she said, and left it there, which by then I'd learned was usually the most honest thing she could say. If there's one thing I'd tell you, watching all this from the other side of it now, it's this: pay attention to who actually listens when you're not performing for anyone. Sometimes they're not who you think they are. Sometimes that's the whole point.